At the center of the chamber stood Marnox Dravik, the council chair, a towering reptilian figure, cloaked in flowing black robes adorned with ceremonial silver sigils. His luminous yellow eyes swept the room, commanding silence without uttering a word. When he finally spoke, his deep, resonant voice carried the weight of authority. "We convene today to address the destabilizing actions of humanity," he declared, each word cutting through the murmurs. "Their reckless expansion into disputed territories threatens the balance of power in this galaxy. They must answer for their defiance." A ripple of agreement spread through the chamber. The delegates, a kaleidoscope of alien forms, some insectoid with glimmering carapaces, others aquatic, suspended in hovering fluid tanks, nodded, growled, or clicked their approval. The accusation was not new, but this time the stakes were higher. Rumors of an interstellar war loomed like a storm cloud. The chamber doors opened with a low hiss, drawing all eyes toward the newcomer. Alexander Lex Leonardo strode in, his tailored navy blue suit a sharp contrast to the alien delegate's ornate and exotic attire. The human diplomat was a striking figure, tall and broad-shouldered, his sharp jawline offset by a hint of stubble. A faint smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth as he surveyed the room, his dark eyes gleaming with an almost mischievous confidence. "You're late, Leonardo," Marnox growled, his forked tongue flicking briefly in annoyance. Lex offered a casual shrug as he descended the spiral walkway toward the chamber floor. "Fashionably late, Chair Dravik. I didn't want to steal the spotlight too early." His flippant remark sent a wave of irritation through the room. Several delegates exchanged outraged glances, their alien features twisting in indignation. "You find this amusing?" snapped General Hraxus Vorin, an amphibious warlord whose bulbous eyes bulged with anger. His voice gurgled like a river over rocks. "Your species stands on the brink of annihilation, and you dare to mock this council?" Lex paused mid-step, tilting his head as though considering the question. Then he smiled, a calculated, disarming expression. "No, General Vorin. I simply believe that threats of annihilation are a tad premature. Shall we get to the part where you tell me what you want, or are we going to continue the posturing?" Marnox slammed his clawed hand on the podium, the impact reverberating through the chamber. "Enough! Humanity's insolence cannot go unchecked. You have 1 week to dismantle your colonies on the disputed planets of Tarnos IV, Elkin Prime, and Zerthal. Fail to comply, and this council will authorize a coalition strike against your territories." The declaration hung in the air like a drawn blade, its sharpness felt by all. Lex stood motionless for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to the council's collective astonishment, he chuckled softly. 1 week, he repeated, stepping forward until he stood at the very center of the chamber. "That's generous. I was expecting 24 hours. Marnox's eyes narrowed. "You mock us at your peril, human. I assure you, Chair Dravik, I take the situation very seriously," Lex replied, his tone suddenly devoid of levity. He turned in a slow circle, addressing the entire assembly. "But before humanity is condemned, let me remind you of a simple truth. No empire, no species, no coalition has ever succeeded in bringing us to our knees. Not in 1,000 years of galactic history. And if you force our hand, you will discover that humanity's resilience is not a myth, it is a fact." The room erupted into chaos, delegates shouting over one another in a flurry of alien tongues. Lex stood calmly in the eye of the storm, his hands clasped behind his back. Marnox raised his hand, silencing the uproar once more. "Your bravado is noted, Leonardo," he said coldly. "But this council is united in its decision. Humanity's defiance ends now." Lex inclined his head, the faintest trace of a smirk returning. "Then let's discuss the terms in private, Chair Dravik. I believe we can reach an understanding without further dramatics." The suggestion caused a stir, but Marnox waved his claw to signal his agreement. "Very well. This session is adjourned. Delegates, prepare your fleets. We will reconvene in 1 week to decide humanity's fate." As the chamber emptied, Lex lingered at the center, pulling a sleek communication device from his pocket. Shielding it from view, he activated it with a quick flick of his thumb. "Leonardo to command," he murmured, his voice low enough to avoid detection. "Proceed with Phase Omega. I'll handle the council." A brief pause, then a crackling response. "Acknowledged." Phase Omega initiated. Sliding the device back into his pocket, Lex straightened his suit and made his way toward the exit. His steps echoed in the now empty chamber, each one a steady reminder of his unshakable confidence. As he crossed the threshold, he cast one last glance over his shoulder, his gaze lingering on Marnox Dravik, who watched him with narrowed eyes from the shadows of the podium. The war might not have officially begun, but Lex knew the real battle had already started, and he intended to win it. The private negotiation chamber was starkly different from the grandiosity of the council's main hall. Its walls were lined with a dull metallic sheen, the only decoration a holographic projection of the galaxy slowly rotating in the center of the room. The lighting was dim, casting elongated shadows over the four figures seated at the circular table. The air was heavy with distrust, an invisible thread of tension binding the room. Alexander, Leonardo leaned back in his chair, his fingers loosely interlocked behind his head, exuding an air of nonchalance. His dark eyes flicked between the three alien delegates seated across from him, taking in their expressions, their body language, their unspoken fears. This was the real battle, fought not with weapons but with words, glances, and the subtle pull of manipulation. General Hraxus Voron's amphibious form glistened under the dim light, his wide, translucent skin pulsating faintly with suppressed aggression. His deep-set, bulbous eyes were fixed on Lex, unblinking and full of contempt. Beside him sat Senator Kalta Erlon, a towering insectoid with a segmented body and mandibles that clicked softly, betraying his unease. To his right, Commander Volan Erix's cybernetic frame glimmered faintly, his humanoid face unervingly expressionless, as though carved from stone. Each represented a cornerstone of the coalition, military power, political influence, and cold logic, and each harbored their own motivations. Lex broke the silence first, his tone light, almost conversational. "I have to say, this is quite the delegation. A warlord, a senator, and a commander walk into a room. Sounds like the beginning of a bad joke, doesn't it?" General Voron's webbed hand slammed against the table, the sound reverberating like a thunderclap. "Enough of your games, human. Speak plainly, or I will see to it that your species is erased from existence." Lex didn't flinch, his smirk widening instead. "Oh, I see. Straight to the threats. Classic Voron. You'd fit right in with Earth's tabloids." He shifted his gaze to the others, ignoring the general's rising fury. "But I imagine not everyone here shares his direct approach." Senator Erlon's mandibles clicked again, the sound sharper this time. "You play a dangerous game, Leonardo. The Council has given your species 1 week to comply. Yet you come here, to this private negotiation, as though you hold the upper hand. Why?" Lex leaned forward, his smirk softening into something more serious, more calculating. "Because I do. And you all know it." A flicker of unease crossed the senator's compound eyes. Even Commander Erix, who had remained silent until now, tilted his head slightly, the faint whir of servos betraying his curiosity. Lex seized the moment, his voice steady and deliberate. "You see, humanity has a talent for survival. We adapt, we innovate, and when cornered, we become unpredictable. Do you really think we've risen this far, this fast, without a plan for contingencies like this?" General Voron let out a guttural growl, but he didn't interrupt. Lex's words hung in the air, weaving a web of doubt and suspicion. He pressed on. "I'll give you a glimpse of what you're up against. Our fleets are armed with technologies that even your most advanced researchers haven't conceived of yet. Weapons that can target entire armadas with pinpoint accuracy, systems that can render your communications useless. And let's not forget our Starbreaker array, A little surprise I'm sure you've heard whispers about. The reaction was immediate. Voron's translucent skin flared a bright, angry red, while Senator Erelon's mandibles twitched uncontrollably. Commander Eric's glowing blue eyes narrowed, the faintest sign of calculation flickering across his face. "You're bluffing," Voron spat, though his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Lex chuckled, a low, almost predatory sound. "Maybe I am. But can you afford to take that risk? Can your coalition survive the possibility that I'm not?" The silence that followed was deafening. Lex allowed it to stretch, knowing full well the power of an unanswered question. Finally, Senator Erelon broke it, his voice a low, chittering hiss. "What do you want, human?" Lex leaned back again, his posture deceptively relaxed. "What I want is simple. Humanity keeps its colonies, its sovereignty, and its right to expand. In return, we'll ensure that no harm comes to your territories or your people." Voron's laugh was sharp and bitter. "You expect us to believe you'll honor such an agreement? Your kind is known for its deceit." Lex's expression hardened, the easygoing facade slipping for just a moment. "And your kind is known for its brutality. Yet here we are, trying to negotiate. Perhaps we're not so different, General." The tension in the room shifted, a subtle but undeniable change. Lex's words weren't just a defense. They were a challenge, a dare for the others to see him as more than the arrogant diplomat they had assumed. It was a gamble, but one he was willing to take. Commander Eric spoke for the first time, his voice cold and metallic. "Even if we were to entertain your terms, the Council would never approve. Their hatred for your species runs deep." Lex's smirk returned, though it carried a sharper edge now. "Then it's a good thing I'm not negotiating with the Council. I'm negotiating with you, and you three hold enough sway to fracture this coalition if you choose." Erelon's mandibles froze mid-click, and Voron's growl tapered into a low rumble. Eric's mechanical gaze locked onto Lex, his processors no doubt running through every possible scenario. The seed had been planted, and Lex knew it would grow. He didn't need them to trust him. He only needed them to doubt each other. As if on cue, a faint chime echoed in the room, signaling the end of their allotted time. Lex rose smoothly, adjusting his suit as he did. "Think it over," he said, his tone almost casual. "I'll be in touch." Without waiting for a response, he turned and strode toward the exit. His steps were measured, deliberate, but his mind was already racing. The real work was just beginning. As the doors hissed shut behind him, Lex retrieved his communication device, his fingers flying across its interface. A single line of text appeared on the screen, sent to Earth's High Command. Intel confirmed. They're fracturing. He slipped the device back into his pocket, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. Let the coalition prepare for war. By the time they realized the true battle was within their ranks, it would already be too late. The holographic map of the galaxy shimmered in the dimly lit command room aboard the UNS Eagle Nest, humanity's flagship vessel. Strategically positioned at the center of the fleet, the Eagle Nest was more than just a warship. It was a symbol of defiance, a testament to humanity's ingenuity. Around the table stood humanity's finest minds. Admiral Gareth Locke, a grizzled veteran with silver-streaked hair. Commander Elias Thorne, his piercing blue eyes sharp and calculating. And, of course, Alexander Leonardo, whose unshakable confidence had become both an asset and a liability. The air in the room was taut with anticipation. Lex leaned over the table, his finger tracing a path across the map to 3 key systems, Tarnos 4, Elkin Prime, and Zerthal. "These are the flashpoints," he began, his voice steady and Eagle Nest. "The Coalition believes they have us cornered, but they're wrong. They've underestimated us." Admiral Locke crossed his arms, his expression grim. "You've certainly stirred the pot, Leonardo. I hope you have more than rhetoric to back up your claims." Lex smirked. "Of course. I didn't come here to gamble with empty hands. The Coalition is fractured. Their leaders are suspicious of one another, their ranks riddled with doubt. That's our first advantage." Commander Thorne raised an eyebrow. And the second, Lex tapped the holographic projection, zooming in on a nondescript asteroid field near Zerthal. This, Phase Omega. We've been preparing it for years quietly, under their radar. The room fell silent as the projection shifted to reveal a network of concealed outposts and automated defense systems embedded within the asteroid field. It was a masterpiece of human engineering, a trap designed to spring at the perfect moment. Admiral Locke's lips pressed into a thin line. The Starbreaker Array. Thorne's gaze snapped to Lex, his voice laced with disbelief. You're seriously planning to use it? If we activate the array, it's not just a defensive measure. It's an escalation that could destroy entire fleets. Exactly, Lex replied, his tone unyielding. The Coalition believes they hold the upper hand because of their numbers and resources. The array changes the equation. It forces them to reconsider the cost of this war. Locke's voice hardened. It also paints a target on us the size of the Orion Arm. If this fails, humanity won't just lose the war. We'll lose everything. Lex met the Admiral's gaze, his expression serious. That's why it won't fail. Every move we've made, every gambit, has been leading to this moment. The Coalition is preparing for a conventional war. They're not ready for what we'll unleash. Before Locke could respond, an alert chimed, and a holographic figure materialized beside the table. It was Lieutenant Marcus Haynes, the fleet's intelligence officer, his face tight with urgency. Admiral, we've intercepted encrypted communications from the Coalition fleet. They're mobilizing faster than expected. Estimated time to engagement, 48 hours. Locke's jaw tightened. They're trying to force our hand. Lex's smirk returned, though it didn't reach his eyes. Good. Let them come. We'll be ready. The Admiral turned to Thorne. Prepare the fleet for battle. Prioritize the evacuation of non-essential personnel from Tarnos 4 and Elkin Prime. We need to minimize civilian casualties. Thorne nodded sharply, already moving toward the command console. Locke turned back to Lex, his voice low. You've put us in a hell of a position, Leonardo. If this gambit fails, the blood of billions will be on your hands. Lex didn't flinch. I know what's at stake, Admiral. But sometimes, the only way to win is to take the risk no one else will. Locke studied him for a long moment before giving a curt nod. Let's hope you're right. As the room emptied, Lex lingered by the map, his eyes fixed on the glowing projection of the Coalition's fleet formations. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the enormity of what lay ahead. But beneath it all, there was a flicker of something else, determination. Humanity had always thrived in the face of impossible odds, and he intended to ensure this time was no different. The faint sound of footsteps drew his attention, and he turned to see Lieutenant Haynes approaching. The younger man hesitated before speaking, his voice uncertain. Sir, if I may ask, what happens if the array doesn't work as planned? Lex's gaze softened, but his voice remained firm. It will work. It has to. We've come too far to fail now. Haynes nodded, though the doubt in his eyes lingered. He saluted and left, leaving Lex alone with his thoughts. For the first time in years, he allowed himself a moment of vulnerability, his hand resting on the table as he stared at the map. Don't fail me now, he whispered, as much to himself as to the universe at large. 48 hours later, the Coalition fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their warships blotting out the stars as they advanced on Zerthal. The Eagle Nest bridge buzzed with controlled chaos, officers calling out reports and updates as the battle began to unfold. Admiral Locke stood at the center of the command deck, his voice cutting through the noise. Hold the line. Do not engage until I give the order. The Coalition's opening salvo lit up the void, energy beams slicing through space as humanity's outer defenses absorbed the brunt of the assault. The Eagle Nest shuddered under the impact, but the crew held their ground, their discipline unshaken. Commander Thorne's voice rang out. Enemy formations are advancing toward the asteroid field. The array is in position, awaiting activation. Locke glanced at Lex, who stood near the tactical console, his expression unreadable. "This is your moment, Leonardo. Make it count." Lex nodded, his fingers hovering over the command interface. He took a deep breath, his voice steady as he gave the order. "Activate the Starbreaker array." For a moment, there was silence. Then, the asteroid field erupted in a dazzling display of light and energy as the array came to life. Beams of concentrated plasma lanced through space, striking the Coalition's warships with pinpoint precision. Ships that had seemed invincible moments before were reduced to molten wreckage in seconds. The Coalition fleet faltered, their formations breaking apart as panic set in. On the Eagle Nest Bridge, cheers erupted as the tide of battle turned in humanity's favor. But Lex didn't celebrate. His eyes remained fixed on the map, watching as the Coalition's remaining forces regrouped. "They're not retreating," he said, his tone grim. "They're recalibrating." Locke's expression darkened. "They're testing us, seeing how far we're willing to go." Lex's jaw tightened. "Then we show them. All of it." The Admiral hesitated for only a moment before giving the order. "Re-engage the array. Target their command ships." As the battle raged on, Lex knew the next few hours would determine humanity's fate. The gambit had been played, the die cast. All that remained was to see whether their boldness would lead to victory or annihilation. The Eagle Nest trembled as another barrage of enemy fire hammered against its shields. The bridge was chaos. Alarms blared, warning lights strobed, and the scent of burning circuits filled the air. Admiral Locke stood firm at the center of it all, barking commands with unshakable authority, even as the situation spiraled toward catastrophe. The Coalition's forces, battered but not broken, had unleashed their own countermeasure, an experimental weapon that disabled the Starbreaker array temporarily and shattered humanity's upper hand. Lex Leonardo gripped the edge of the tactical console, his knuckles white as he stared at the holographic display of the battlefield. The Coalition fleet's command ships had regrouped, their formations tightening like a noose around humanity's beleaguered defenses. The gambit was unraveling, and every second wasted brought humanity closer to extinction. "We need that array back online." Locke's voice cut through the din, sharp and commanding. "Report." Commander Thorne's face was pale but Eagle Nest as he turned from his station. "The Coalition's EMP bursts have fried half our systems. Engineering teams are working on it, but it'll take at least 10 minutes to reboot." "We don't have 10 minutes," Lex muttered under his breath, his mind racing. His confidence, the armor he wore so well, was beginning to crack. They had come so far, risked everything, and now it all teetered on the edge of failure. Locke's steely gaze found him. "Leonardo, this was your plan. If you've got another card to play, now's the time." Lex stared at the Admiral, then at the display, his thoughts moving faster than the battle raging outside. His eyes flicked to the asteroid field, where the remnants of humanity's hidden defenses still lingered. A desperate idea began to form, reckless and borderline suicidal, but it was the only option left. "We lure them into the asteroid field," he said, his voice steady despite the storm within him. "Their formations are tight. They're overconfident. If we can draw them in and detonate the field's remaining energy cores, we can cripple their fleet." Locke's brow furrowed, "and us along with it. That's not a strategy. That's a death sentence." "It's a calculated risk," Lex shot back. "We've lost the array, and we're outmatched in open combat. But the field is rigged with explosives for a reason. We can turn this around, if we're willing to sacrifice." Commander Thorne stepped forward, his expression a mix of apprehension and resolve. "It's dangerous, but it could work. We'd need to bait their command ships into the field. If we can take them out, the rest of the fleet might retreat." Locke's gaze shifted between them, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Finally, he nodded. "Do it. Thorne, relay the plan to the fleet. Leonardo, you're leading the decoy run." Lex blinked, caught off guard. "Me? You started this," Locke said, his tone firm. "You wanted to take the risk no one else would. Now's your chance to prove it." There was no room for argument. Lex nodded, straightened his jacket, and turned to leave the bridge. As he reached the door, he paused and looked back. If this works, make sure humanity remembers the price we paid. Locke's expression softened, just for a moment. They will. The Eagle Nest hangar bay was a hive of activity as Lex climbed into the cockpit of a sleek, modified fighter. It was faster than anything else in the fleet, designed for reconnaissance but retrofitted with enough firepower to make an impression. As the cockpit canopy sealed around him, Lex felt the weight of the mission settle on his shoulders. For all his bravado, he was no soldier, but there was no turning back now. The fighter shot out of the hangar, weaving through the chaos of battle. Lex's hands moved instinctively over the controls, his focus narrowing to the task at hand. The Coalition's command ships loomed ahead, massive and menacing, their weapons lighting up the void with deadly precision. He adjusted his comms, broadcasting on all Coalition frequencies. "This is Alexander Leonardo of the United Nations of Earth," he announced, his voice calm and deliberate. "To the Coalition fleet, I extend an invitation. Catch me if you can." He fired a volley of missiles at the nearest command ship, striking its shields and drawing its attention. As expected, the Coalition responded. Fighters broke off from their formations, swarming after him like angry hornets. Lex's fighter darted and twisted, leading them on a chase through the debris field. His heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to focus, to stay one step ahead. Behind him, the Coalition command ships began to follow, their massive engines propelling them toward the asteroid field. Lex's calm crackled to life as Thorne's voice came through. "They're taking the bait. Keep them moving, but don't get too close to the cores. We'll handle the detonation." "Understood," Lex replied, though the strain in his voice was evident. He juked left, narrowly avoiding a plasma beam that sliced through the space he'd just occupied. His fighter shook as enemy fire grazed his shields, but he pressed on, weaving through the dense maze of asteroids. The Coalition ships followed, their captains either too enraged or too desperate to see the trap for what it was. Lex glanced at his radar, his fingers tightening on the controls. The command ships were deep in the field now, their massive frames forcing them to move cautiously. It was time. "Thorne, they're in position," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "Light it up." The delay was agonizing, every second feeling like an eternity. Then it happened. The asteroid field erupted in a series of blinding explosions as the energy cores detonated, unleashing a cascade of destruction. Coalition ships were torn apart, their shields overwhelmed by the sheer force of the blast. The shockwave rippled outward, catching even the fastest vessels in its wake. Lex's fighter was flung violently by the blast, his system screaming in protest. He fought to regain control, his vision swimming as alarms blared. Somehow, he managed to stabilize, his gaze darting to the display. The Coalition fleet was in disarray, their formation shattered. Survivors were retreating, their once mighty armada reduced to scatter fragments. On the Eagle Nest bridge, cheers erupted as the remaining Coalition ships jumped to hyperspace, their resolve broken. Admiral Locke allowed himself a rare smile, though it was tinged with sorrow. "We did it," he said quietly. But Thorne's expression was grim. "Sir, Leonardo's fighter isn't responding." Locke's smile faded. "Get a recovery team out there. Now." Lex drifted in the void, his fighter barely holding together. He coughed, tasting blood, as he struggled to stay conscious. The explosions had knocked out his comms, and his oxygen supply was dwindling. He stared out at the wreckage, the stars beyond, and allowed himself a small, weary smile. "We did it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Humanity won." His eyelids grew heavy, the cold of space seeping through the cracks in his cockpit. He let his head rest against the seat, his mind drifting. The stars blurred, and for a moment he felt at peace. Then a light pierced the darkness, a searchlight, growing brighter as it approached. Lex forced his eyes open, hope surging in his chest. The Eagle Nest recovery team had found him. As they pulled him from the wreckage, Lex looked back at the battlefield one last time. The cost had been high, but humanity had survived. They had endured. And as he was lifted aboard the rescue shuttle, he knew that their story was far from over.